Have you ever woken up in the stillness of dawn, watching the first light spill across your window, and quietly wondered, is there more to this chapter than just growing older? Not from a place of fear or regret, but from a quiet intuition that these years could hold a kind of richness we hadn't yet tapped into. Because the truth is, the later chapters of life aren't just about slowing down, they can be about deepening into something more meaningful, more spacious, more alive. Welcome. I'm Vernon. In today's reflection, we'll uncover 7 timeless elements that many people overlook, yet those who embrace them often describe their later years as the most rewarding of all. Not because everything is easy, but because they've learned what truly matters. We followed societal scripts that promised fulfillment, but delivered something far less satisfying. And now, in this season of life, we have both the wisdom and the opportunity to choose differently. Stay with me as we explore these priceless elements that many seniors tragically overlook, elements that ancient philosophers knew were the true foundations of a joyful life. Elements that modern research now confirms are essential for our deepest fulfillment. Pay attention to the 5th principle we'll discuss today. It completely transformed how I view my remaining decades. Some insights aren't meant to be kept, they should be meant to ripple outward. Subscribe the channel and share this video with someone who deserves to live their later years not just longer, but deeper. Now, let's begin our journey through these 7 priceless elements, not as abstract concepts, but as practical invitations to a richer life experience. Element 1. The gift of meaningful connection. Imagine standing beside a mighty oak tree. What makes it strong isn't just what you see above ground, but the invisible network of roots below, intertwined with neighboring trees, sharing nutrients and information through what botanists call the wood wide web. In much the same way, what sustains us in our later years isn't our individual strength alone, but the rich tapestry of connections we've woven throughout our lives. Yet how easily we allow these connections to wither when we need them most. My dear friend Thomas discovered this truth through lived experience. After retiring from a distinguished academic career at 65, he initially relished the solitude of his lakeside cabin, finally free to read and write without interruption. At first, it felt like paradise. But within 6 months, an unshakable hollowness began to settle in, one he couldn't quite name, despite having everything he thought he wanted. What research now confirms is what ancient tribal cultures always knew, that human connection isn't just pleasant, but fundamental to our well-being. A landmark study published in the Journal of Health and Social Behavior found that social isolation increases mortality risk by nearly 30%, comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes daily. When Thomas finally recognized his withering spirit, he began hosting weekly gatherings for fellow intellectuals and curious minds. Not because they filled his time, but because they reminded him who he is when reflected in the eyes of others who truly see him. Where might you create space for deeper connection in your life? When was the last time you allowed yourself to be truly seen? These aren't idle questions, but invitations to what might be the most essential nutrient for your spirit in these precious years. Because sometimes, being truly seen is the most profound nourishment our soul can receive in these later chapters. Consider sending this video to a friend or loved one, not just to share ideas, but to reopen a door, to say, "I thought of you." A small gesture, perhaps, but one that might be the beginning of something deeply healing. Element 2. Embracing the wisdom of surrender. The river doesn't fight the rocks in its path. It flows around them, accepting what cannot be changed while continuing its journey toward the sea. This natural wisdom, this elegant surrender, holds a profound lesson many of us struggle to learn even in our later years. We continue to resist the unchangeable realities of our aging bodies, our changing circumstances, and the inevitable losses that accompany this season of life. This resistance creates what psychologists call secondary suffering. Not the pain of the original difficulty, but the additional suffering we create by fighting against what cannot be altered. I witnessed this transformation in Catherine, a vibrant 68-year-old artist whose advancing arthritis threatened everything she loved. For months, she raged against her changing abilities, pushing through pain to maintain her previous output, becoming increasingly bitter and depleted. Research from the field of mindfulness medicine suggests that this acceptance, what we might call wise surrender, actually alters our neurological response to difficulty. A 2019 study from the University of Massachusetts Medical School found that acceptance-based approaches reduced both physical pain and emotional suffering in chronically ill older adults by an average of 37%. Catherine didn't abandon art. Instead, she surrendered to a new artistic identity, exploring tactile sculptures and mentoring younger artists. She can create differently now, but in some ways more authentically than ever before, she told me. One gentle step toward release is to name, without judgment, what can no longer be controlled and then ask, what is still possible from here? Small adaptations made with grace often unlock new forms of expression and purpose. This wisdom of surrender connects beautifully with what we'll explore in our fourth principle, how accepting certain limitations can paradoxically open doorways to unexpected joy. But first, reflect on where you might be exhausting yourself, fighting unchangeable currents in your own life. Element 3. The treasure of present moment awareness. There's an old Zen proverb that says, when walking, walk. When eating, eat. Such simple instruction, yet for most of us, revolutionary in practice. How rarely we are fully present in our own lives, our bodies in one place, our thoughts elsewhere, often trapped in regrets about the past or anxieties about the future. My neighbor Harold, a retired physician in his 70s, once shared something quietly profound as we watched the fireflies one summer evening. He said he had lived more in the past 3 years than in the previous 30 because, for the first time, he had truly learned to show up for his own life. Harold explained how for decades, his brilliant medical mind was always racing ahead to the next patient, the next procedure, the next problem to solve. But he was so focused on potential complications that he rarely experienced the miracle happening right before his eyes. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient wisdom long taught. Present moment awareness doesn't just enrich life, it changes the brain. Research from UCLA shows mindfulness increases gray matter in areas tied to memory, empathy, and sensory processing. Harold's awakening came through a simple daily practice. Each morning, he sits on his porch for 20 minutes, simply noticing the temperature of the air on his skin, the chorus of birdsong, the sensation of breath moving through his body. It sounds like nothing, he told me, but it's everything. It's like I've found the doorway back into my own life. The beauty of this wisdom, as we've explored with meaningful connection and surrender, is that it's available to all of us, regardless of circumstance. It requires no special equipment, no particular ability, only the willingness to return our wandering attention again and again to the miracle of this present moment. You can try this simple exercise right now, wherever you are. For just 3 deep breaths, close your eyes and notice what sensations are present in your body. What sounds surround you? What is it like to be fully here, not elsewhere in thought? This doorway to presence is always available to you. How might your experience of daily life shift if you began treating each moment as a place to arrive, rather than something to rush through? Leave your thoughts in the comments to remind others that presence is a choice we can make again and again. Element 4. The liberation of purposeful contribution. When the titles that once defined us, worker, parent, provider, leader begin to fade, a quiet question often rises in their place. Is there still a role for me that truly matters? For many, this transition feels like a quiet erosion of purpose, but for others, it becomes the doorway to a more authentic form of contribution, one not based on obligation, but on wisdom. My colleague Eleanor faced this shift at 70. After decades of community involvement, she began to feel increasingly invisible in a culture that prioritized youth. One afternoon, she reflected that for months, she'd been preoccupied with the question of who still needed her. But gradually, she came to a deeper realization. It wasn't about being needed in the traditional sense, but about recognizing the lived wisdom she carried and asking how it might serve others. That change in perspective from being needed to being of service became a kind of liberation. And the science backs it up. Studies from the Institute of Aging at Boston College show that older adults with a strong sense of purpose not only report greater life satisfaction, but live longer, up to 7 years more on average. What's remarkable is that this kind of purpose doesn't require perfect health or boundless energy. In fact, it often emerges from our wounds. Eleanor, who had lived with depression most of her life, began facilitating support groups for younger adults facing similar challenges. A simple starting point is to look for small circles, support groups, intergenerational programs, or community centers, where your life experience could be welcomed as insight rather than advice. You might also begin journaling or mentoring informally, letting your story be a bridge rather than a spotlight. So consider, what lived truths are uniquely yours to share? What experiences, especially the difficult ones, have shaped a perspective that could help someone else? Don't need a podium or a platform. Sometimes the most powerful contribution begins with simply showing up and listening well. Element 5. The freedom of conscious legacy. At a certain point in life, the question quietly shifts from how much time do I have left to what will my time mean to those who come after me. It's not a dramatic turning, but a subtle reorientation from striving to significance. And in that shift lies one of the greatest freedoms of later life, the chance to shape your legacy with intention. This understanding transformed my life several years ago, after a minor heart attack at 63, left me contemplating my mortality with new urgency. Lying in that hospital bed, I realized with startling clarity that I'd been investing my energy in building monuments rather than moments, focusing on what I would leave behind rather than how I was living each day. This awakening connects powerfully with our third principle of present moment awareness. For our true legacy emerges not from grand gestures but from the accumulated impact of how we meet each moment, each person, each opportunity to embody our deepest values. Research from the field of positive psychology confirms this intuitive wisdom. Dr. Laura Carstensen at Stanford University's Center on Longevity has demonstrated that older adults who focus on emotionally meaningful goals and relationships report significantly higher levels of life satisfaction than those focused on achievement-oriented goals. What values do you want your life to embody in these precious years? How might you live those values more consciously tomorrow than you did today? These questions aren't about planning for death, but about living with greater intention right now. One gentle way to begin is by identifying one small action each week that expresses a value you hold dear, whether it's mentoring someone, expressing gratitude, or repairing an old relationship. Legacy isn't about scale, but consistency. It's how you show up, even in quiet moments, that leaves the deepest imprint. Element 6. The blessing of unbounded curiosity. Some people believe curiosity fades with age, but in truth, it can deepen. As we shed external pressures and ego-driven goals, space opens for wonder to reawaken. Neuroplasticity research shows our brains can keep growing and adapting well into our 90s. A University of California study found that seniors who stayed curious and engaged in new learning experienced significantly less cognitive decline, regardless of their education or starting ability. This scientific finding affirms what philosophers have long understood, that curiosity keeps us young, not chronologically but spiritually. As Socrates wisely noted, wonder is the beginning of wisdom. Marianne, my sister-in-law, began studying quantum physics at 74, not out of necessity, but from a deep sense of wonder. Though some thought it a late-life crisis, she described it simply as the most alive she'd felt in years. What's particularly powerful about cultivating curiosity in our later years is how it transforms our relationship with time. When we're learning and discovering, hours expand rather than contract. We enter what psychologists call a flow state, that delicious immersion in experience where time seems to suspend itself. This element connects intimately with what we'll explore next about the importance of play and delight. Curiosity creates the conditions for both to flourish naturally. But it requires something of us, the courage to be beginners again, to surrender our need to be experts, to risk looking foolish in pursuit of fresh understanding. You don't need a classroom or a degree to stay curious. Commit to learning one new thing each week, whether it's reading about an unfamiliar topic, trying a creative technique, or joining a discussion group. Even 15 minutes of intentional exploration a day can reignite mental vitality. Before we move on, your like and subscribe help keep this space alive so more people can join us in exploring what truly matters in our later years. Our community is growing, and I'd love for you to be part of this ongoing conversation about living with greater depth and purpose. Element 7. The Sanctuary of Play and Delight. My colleague James, a retired lawyer, realized after stepping away from his demanding career that he had forgotten how to enjoy simple pleasures. For years, he'd postponed joy, always waiting for the next milestone. It wasn't until retirement that he began, awkwardly at first, to relearn the art of play. There's a peculiar tragedy that unfolds in many lives: the gradual disappearance of play, of purposeless delight, of what the poet Mary Oliver called your one wild and precious life. Somehow, between the serious business of building careers and raising families, many of us forget how to play without purpose, to delight in the sheer joy of being alive. Yet reclaiming this capacity may be one of the most precious gifts available to us in our later years. Ancient wisdom traditions across cultures recognize play not as childish frivolity, but as a sacred activity that reconnects us with our essential nature. Modern science supports what ancient wisdom long knew. Studies from the National Institute on Aging show that play boosts DHEA, linked to better immunity and lower stress, and may even reduce inflammation tied to chronic illness. James eventually found his breakthrough through ballroom dancing, an activity chosen purely for the joy of movement and music. After a few months, during a particularly clumsy tango, he caught himself laughing freely. In that moment, he realized what had been missing all those years: the simple permission to delight in imperfection. This element beautifully synthesizes everything we've explored, from meaningful connection to present moment awareness, from surrender to curiosity. When we allow ourselves to play and delight in simple pleasures, we naturally embody all these wisdom principles without effort or striving. What activities bring you uncomplicated joy? When was the last time you laughed until your sides ached? These questions aren't frivolous. They may guide you toward essential nourishment for your spirit. Conclusion. As we draw our exploration to a close, the 7 elements we've explored today: meaningful connection, the wisdom of surrender, present moment awareness, purposeful contribution, conscious legacy, unbounded curiosity, and the sanctuary of play aren't abstract philosophical concepts. They represent practical pathways to a richer, more fulfilling experience of our later years. What unites these elements is a fundamental shift in orientation, from acquisition to appreciation, from doing to being, from striving to savoring. This shift doesn't happen automatically with accumulating years. It emerges through conscious choice, through regular practice, through the courage to release what no longer serves us, whether connecting with others, contributing our wisdom, or delighting in play. The thread that binds these practices is presence, the willingness to show up fully for our own lives. Now, you can choose just one of these elements to explore more deeply in the coming week, not with pressure to transform overnight, but with gentle curiosity about how this wisdom might enrich your daily experience. Leave your insights and experiences in the comments below. Our individual journeys gain meaning when they become part of a larger conversation. When your discovery illuminates someone else's path, and there's yours. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe the channel, because your support helps more people rediscover the joy tucked inside everyday moments. You'll navigate the journey of aging more wisely when you truly understand the profound changes that come with later life. Check out my previous video, What Really Happens After 70? 5 Harsh Truths Seniors Need to Know, linked in the description to deepen that insight.